here's the evidence. So they say the government entities can track individuals' smartphones' geolocation data even when there's no cell service or if phones are in airplane mode. And this is confirmed into the report on the FBI's tactics to find participants in the riot at the US Capitol. Do you know that they discovered in Canada 5 Chinese police stations that are run by the Chinese government?
You have to wonder, how is it that a place like Malta even gets to this point where they're considering the murder of babies? How did they even get that far? Because you would think that they were relatively Catholic.
Just yesterday, on the Feast of the Immaculate Conception, the U.S. House gave final passage to the Respect for Marriage Act, which of course codifies sodomy. It codifies going against God's plan for marriage. It is called in the scriptures an abomination that cries out to heaven for vengeance. Also, around the world, global leaders are going for a digital ID. They've already just done it, passed it at the G20, and it's coming to your country very soon. Also, did you know that the old rumors about, oh, you can't take your cell phone anywhere, even if it's off or on airplane mode or whatever, they'll still be able to track you? A lot of people thought, oh, that's just made up, Nope, it's not made up. In fact, we know now for sure that it exists. All this and more on this episode of Faith and Reason. Stay tuned. Every single day, there are new developments in the culture war. You need to stay on top of the news from the front lines around the world. At LifeSite, it's actually our mission to serve you the truth on life, faith, family, and freedom so that you can be an effective soldier for Christ. Subscribe now and never miss an important development in the culture war that you need to know about, all from a faithful Catholic perspective. And check out the links below to get involved with our reporting and our pro-life partners. Thank you and God bless you. Father Altman, good to be with you.
Good to be with you, John Henry. This is going to be a fun show.
We're doing a solo, the two of us, because all our other hosts are not here. Jack Maxey is off, as is Liz Yore. So we'll pray for them. Father, if you can open up with a prayer for us.
In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit, amen. Holy Father, you sent your Son, and he said to his apostles, I tell you this all now, so that when it happens, your faith will not be shaken. In these days, we see through his words in the Gospels and in all of sacred scripture and in Revelation, we see everything we've been warned about coming to fruition before our very eyes, accelerating beyond the scope of our imagination. So give us the grace that when all looks darker and darker, and it looks like the ruler of this world, Satan himself, is going to crush us, let us keep our faith no matter what. Let your light shine through this darkness. Let us be witnesses of that faith in your light unto martyrdom red or white. And we ask of this grace in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen.
Yesterday, on the Feast of the Immaculate Conception, on December the 8th, first of all, Nancy Pelosi made the final vote on the Respect for Marriage Act yesterday, but also it passed yesterday. So I had a brief video out where I called that like a slap in the face to Our Lady. I don't see our Lord taking that kindly. Most men, when their mother is attacked like that or attacked at all, don't take kindly to it. So I begged for prayers for America. And now that it's passed, we really do need to beg for America so that, the wrath of the Lord does not fall upon it that hard. Father, you have a great legal take on this. I'd love to hear.
Sure. Well, if I can first say, though, as to Nancy Pelosi, there was going to possibly be a vote on the 7th of December, and they quickly adjourned without getting a vote, so that Nancy Pelosi, leader of the House, still, until the next Congress is sworn in, had the ability then to schedule it on this specific day. Now, what's really shocking about this is she continues to claim to be a devout Catholic. And as a devout Catholic, you would know You don't bless or mess with our Blessed Mother on her feast day. And yet there she did. Now she was truly devout, which we, of course, we know is a farce. And the bishops haven't called her out for being the farce and false Catholic that she is. If she was a truly devout Catholic, she would know better than to. She could have scheduled it for any other day. She scheduled it for that day of our Blessed Mother. It's just staggering, the slap in the face that she gave to our Mother Mary. And you just know Jesus is not happy with this, messing with his mother. Wow. The legal take, then. The legal take is this. When the Constitution first was formed, all the states had great concerns of federal government overreach, because federal government is more powerful than any individual state. And they did not want the federal government to be able to somehow usurp each state's individual rights to govern their own people. Thus, you could go to Rhode Island and be governed by what you knew would be Rhode Island or South Carolina or Virginia, without worry that the federal government, over whom you had no real direct control, it was so that there would be local control. You know, the old saying that came out of the American Revolution is no representation, no taxation without representation. They wanted the people that passed the Constitution wanted to be able to have some semblance of close approximation to the people that were making rules over them. So they wanted to prevent the federal government from becoming just like King George. I mean, that was what they were trying to avoid. The wisdom of the founding fathers far exceeds the vast majority of useless, dumb Americans today, who are more concerned about watching football on Sunday than really learning about civics and government and policy and politics. So they don't know this. But when that Constitution first was passed to become the law of the land, there was the Bill of Rights. And they specifically enunciated those things that most people feared the government would be able to infringe upon their individual liberties. And then, in their great wisdom, to make sure that they didn't miss anything, to make sure that those leaders in faraway Washington, D.C. couldn't somehow come up with new methods to control the people, the 10th Amendment to the Bill of Rights, the 10th and final amendment, was this. I'll just quote it. The powers not delegated to the United States, in other words, the federal government, by the Constitution, nor prohibited by it to the states, are reserved to the states, respectively, or to the people. So the whole point of that is that they didn't need to make a 500-page Constitution. They just said, look, this is all you can do, federal government, that's it. And anything we don't say you can do, by definition, you cannot, because it's reserved to the states. It's called the Reservation Clause. The Reservation Clause is exactly why Roe v. Wade was unconstitutional in the first place, way back in 1973. Because up until that point, each individual state had the rights to control such things as criminal law. And so each individual state could make it a crime to kill the baby in the womb. The federal government had no right to interfere with that state's decision. And so everybody knows that the whole passage of it, even the guys on the left in the Supreme Court would say, well, that was really bad law. The justification for Roe v. Wade simply was false. So when they overturned Roe v. Wade in the Dobbs decision, what it essentially did then, it says the federal government has no authority, no right, no constitutional right to make law on abortion. And therefore, we're returning it to the states. It didn't outlaw abortion. I mean, if the federal government could have, and they can't, they could have said, well, the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, the right to life is an all-encompassing thing for all people in the United States. So they could have overturned it and absolutely eliminated it in all 50 states, but following the reasoning of the Reservation Clause, number 10 of the 10th of 10 amendments, they said, no, it's up to each individual state. So that applies to the question of abortion. It also applies to the question of marriage. The federal government has zero, and I do mean zero, right, authority, no constitutional authority whatsoever to get involved in how a state itself defines marriage. So when I was in law school, I mean, this is practically a whole case, a whole topic, a whole separate section of study on family law as an example, as to what it takes to get married in a state, the residency requirements, what it takes to get divorced in a state. Again, residency requirements. We're up to the individual state alone. And so there would be disparities. So friends, I think out in Vegas, you could show up at the Elvis Chapel after 2 days there and get married, or you could go to some states and get divorced very quickly. But usually states had like a 6-month waiting period. So you didn't get some spouse running off the kids to some state and getting divorced without the other spouse knowing about it. And I mean, there's reasons for this that each state can set up individually. It's rules. So like Tennessee, I think they said you could marry a second cousin at the age of 14. They had some unusual rules. But the fact is that each state individually has a right to define marriage, what it takes to get married in that state, and what it takes to get divorced. The federal government has no authority, zero. The Senate and the House and the president all signed a law called the Defense of Marriage Act, right? And yet that was overturned. Why? Because the federal government has no right to define what marriage is any more than they, and that was, that's when they overthrew the Defense of Marriage Act. Similarly, the same applies to this. They don't have any right or authority. If the state of California or the state of Massachusetts or New York wants to allow same-sex marriage in that state, well, they can answer to God. I think you brought up some stuff pre-show taping about the flood. But if the state of, for instance, Wisconsin or the state of Missouri or the state of Florida does not want to allow that in their state, they are absolutely entitled to under the U.S. Constitution. And no Congress, no Senate, no House, no president can override that any more than they could have done it with a Defense of Marriage Act. So you see, the same logic applies. The same Constitution does apply to what they just tried to pull, the stunt that Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer and Joe Biden are pulling now. They're going to lose in the end if the Lord doesn't intervene sooner than that. They're going to lose in the end because it is unconstitutional. Just because they say it doesn't make it constitutional. And obviously that's true because for 200 and however many years we've been in this country, such laws have been overturned as unconstitutional, and this one will be too. But in the meantime, there's a lot of false rejoicing, a lot of adverse liberal media that's assaulting us. And what you're going to see and how it's probably going to go through the court system is just like those bakers out in Oregon. Remember that baker that they put her and him through utter hell and tried to fine him $135,000 because they wouldn't bake a cake. Even though the people that wanted the cake baked could have gone to a dozen different places down the street, they went after this person specifically. Why? As a test to say, now who's next? Who else is going to try to thwart, anything? And then those cases will go through the whole legal process, and it's going to take maybe a few years. But in the end, well, in the case of Roe v. Wade, we murdered 64 million babies before that was overturned. So what the hell that's coming because of this law, I do not know. I just know it's going to be great. So yeah, according to the reservation clause, which is our Constitution, whether they like it or not, the federal government has no authority, zero, to interfere in the marriage laws of any individual state.
Well, it certainly does seem, Father, that what is coming is very scary indeed for advocates of life and family in the afterlife for all these guys who are going against the will of God. But I wanted to bring people up to date on what's going on with digital IDs, because the whole thing around digital ID, as we've seen in China, where I think it's most perfectly implemented, it's the social credit system. Everything you do in your life is watched and disciplined, and you get punished if you don't do what they don't want, and you do what you want, then you can lose out. If you do what they want, well, then sure, you can get some extra perks here and there. So here's what just happened. Just last week, the G20, a group of 19 nations, which includes the United States, plus the European Union, held their annual business meeting, the B20, in Bali, Indonesia, a little more than a week ago. where they declared that digital vaccine passport standardized by the World Health Organization will be part of international pandemic prevention and response moving forward. The rule for standardized international vaccine passports will be introduced as a revision to the international health regulations during the next World Health Assembly in Geneva, and that will take place in May 2023. And it's not like this is, sterile talk by a bunch of world leaders. It's not. In fact, it was signed on to by Biden, who already told the Americans he wouldn't be going down that road. But nonetheless, get this, by the end of 2022, there will be 1 billion data collecting surveillance cameras in the world, all connected to the internet and artificial intelligence. And in addition to that, already the Central Bank of Nigeria has expressed its desire to link its central bank digital currency to an ID system. And also in the UK, the UK has just signed a digital ID deal with the Ukraine to keep people safer. Ukraine already has this kind of digital ID going through. So give me your take on that, Father, if you will.
When I was in high school, so we're talking 1975, I remember distinctly, I may have mentioned it before, that the teacher, who was astute, incredibly wise person, well-versed on American government and the Constitution, said, now remember, kids, there's always a good reason why something is said, and then there's a real reason behind it. So now the good reason, everybody would agree. Well, if there is a true pandemic, we ought to have some means that are available for kind of controlling it. And we saw that just recently in 2020 when they shut down the globe instantly. And so when they did that in my own state of Wisconsin, as a lawyer, I thought, well, here's the governor saying you can only have 10 people, 9 people, I think it was, in any particular room or enclosed space. And then he cited some statute. So I went to look at the statute, and it was very thorough. It had been passed for a few years, and it all had to do with controlling a real epidemic. So we're talking Ebola or the Black Plague, something truly serious. And everybody said, yeah, we've got to sign on to this. We've got to have this in place in case Ebola comes or Ebola or the Black Plague. And then I thought, I wonder if other states have done this. And sure enough, I started looking, and every state has passed a very, very similar wording around the whole United States. And so when this happened, this whole 2020 hoax of a pandemic, there was a sickness, yes, a man-made sickness, by the way, for which they somehow came up with an alleged man-made cure. How convenient. But when this happened, all 50 governors all exercised the same authority under that same statute so that they could do an act which was never in the consciousness of the people who passed it. It seemed like, as I said, the good reason was so that they could control something that truly was dangerous. But who gets to define that, right? Well, we already know Ebola and the Black Plague would be dangerous. What's going on here now is they're saying, oh, now we need this digital vaccine passport as to prevent a pandemic in the future. That sounds good, doesn't it? I mean, well, who wouldn't want to have some sort of means of controlling it? Well, if they were, what's benign, is that the good word for it? Benign or benevolent, if our government leaders were thus, we would have nothing to fear. It's always been said, like a benevolent dictator would be, a king would be a good thing because he could get the job done and he would have our best interest at heart. But yet we know, as David Rockefeller admitted back in 2002, that they're trying to control the world, and they've been doing it for over 100 years. That's one of the leading globalists for the past 100 years, saying that their expressed intent, and they're proud of it, is to undermine the United States, and this applies to every other country, so that they can set up this very globalist, they control everything government. So we know when they're putting this stuff out there, they give you the good reason to control a pandemic, but the real reason is so that they can control and eliminate those who just do not fall in lockstep behind their every dictation. So yeah, my look at this is that we've been warned by Jesus. I began with the prayer, right? We've been warned by Jesus, who came here to say, now when this happens, I'm telling you about it now so that you won't lose your faith. I'm still here. I'm still God. I still rule the universe. But there's a bad guy who rules the world. And this is the kind of stuff he's going to do This sounds just like the mark of the beast, doesn't it? We've been warned about the mark of the beast, and I know there's a lot of speculation. Well, what is actually Revelation about? But if this isn't coming before our very eyes, I mean, we have to believe that this mark of the beast actually will happen at some point in human history. Nobody likes to think about it as now. They all think they're wise enough to not realize or to think that, oh, it's not in my time. But we've been warned about this. And so we should be, like Jesus said, look at the signs of the times. Well, we're seeing the signs of the times cascade faster and faster down the mountain. And this is one of them. This passport takes away from you the individuality that God has created in you and makes the government ruler over you. So this is as evil as it comes. And it may sound good, but boy, oh boy, when you drink that poison, there will be evil that results.
We've heard, about the digital society and it's all there. And then there's all these cameras and whatnot. Sure. First of all the phones now go on facial recognition. All these cameras are going to be able to identify you. So all the stuff from the movies and the TV shows, it's all real. And it's even worse than that because I think a lot of people thought, can they really track your phones? If they do track your phones, then definitely if you just turn them off and you're fine. Well, actually, no. And this is really scary. Your friends who said, leave your phone at home, please, they might have something to it. Listen to this. This is from the report from the inquiry into what happened with the January 6 investigations. So it's not a right-wing thing at all, but it's looking into what they themselves did. Guess what? Here's the evidence. So they say the government entities can track individual smartphones' geolocation data even when there's no cell service or if phones are in airplane mode. And this is confirmed into the report on the FBI's tactics to find participants in the riot at the U.S. Capitol, the so-called riot at the U.S. Capitol on January 6th. This is from a November 28th report in Wired. You can get this information. According to the FBI filings, FBI officials served a bevy of so-called geofence warrants to Google to access smartphone location and data belonging to individuals suspected of taking part in the riot. Unreal. The advice to leave your phone at home is actually well worth considering. I know that's difficult, but especially in these times as they get more and more and more crazy, we've got to actually realize what is happening. I wanted to also get to this really weird thing. I wish Jack were here to talk to this, but Father, do you know that they discovered in Canada 5 Chinese police stations that are run by the Chinese government? Let's take a look at this.
Alleged Chinese police service stations in Canada are part of a much larger global network. This, according to the human rights organization Safeguard Defenders. The NGO has identified 102 so-called service stations across 53 countries. 2 new stations have been identified in Canada, bringing the total number to 5. 3 in the Greater Toronto area, 1 in Vancouver, and 1 in a yet-to-be-identified location. Well, here to dig deeper into the story is Laura Harth. She is the campaign director at Safeguard Defenders, and Laura is in Rome. Well, Laura Harth, I'd like to start with the definition of these police stations, because when I think of a police station, I think of a building with police officers and holding cells and evidence rooms. What are we talking about in the case of these Chinese police stations?
What we're talking about mainly is, let's say, a formalization of a transnational repression network. A formalization in what sense that these stations have been established by at least 4 local public security bureaus back in China, the 4 we identified, but building on a pre-existing network of United Front work organizations. So rather than, let's say, looking at the physical addresses or the physical places, what we really would love authorities to look into and to highlight is that these are networks that are being run and used also for these kind of activities, because of course these people are often also involved in other kinds of either interference campaigns or political influence operations. So they're running a host of things. But our focus obviously is on the role of the police stations, as they themselves call them, overseas police service centers.
Right, so China doesn't deny their existence. What do they say the stated purpose of these police service stations are?
Well, they say a couple of interesting things which are pretty condemning for themselves, and I have to say I'm happy to see that the Canadian authorities have kind of called them out on that. So the first thing they say is that these are just service stations running administrative consular services. Now, there's a problem with that already. Not that helping with renewal of passports or driver's licenses might not be useful. The problem is, under international law, you cannot just set up a consular outpost or service without the consent of the host country. So that's blatantly illegal and clandestine to begin with. The second interesting thing is they say, oh, we started these services during the COVID pandemic because obviously people had trouble, getting back home to get those services taken care of. Now, unless they knew something in 2016 that the rest of the world didn't, they started setting up these stations as early as February 2016. So as far as I recall, there was luckily no COVID pandemic at the time. The third thing, obviously, internationally, they deny that these stations are involved in so-called persuasion to return operations, where people are forced to go back to China for persecution or to face other dire fates, forced either through threats, intimidation, detention of their family members back home, through intimidation and threats directly where they live, even entrapment, luring, kidnappings, as the official legal interpretations in China say. Now, we have found official accounts from Chinese authorities on their own websites saying that these stations have been involved in such operations and boasting about the numbers we found, at least 83 operations being carried out through these various stations.
What that was coverage by the CBC, which is no friend of conservatives at all. If anything, they are friends of China. And yet they're pointing out, my gosh, we've got police stations sort of run by the Chinese government here to intimidate the local Chinese people from either wanting to, confront communism, who knows what. But really, really scary. Father, your take.
I remember reading a couple decades ago that you couldn't go 10 to 18 feet in London without being on somebody's security camera. And when you said there's 1 billion of them now around the world, obviously they're concentrated where the population also is concentrated. I believe it. I don't even begin to doubt that. And when you see all the security cameras that are used in any criminal investigation or accident scene recreation, we can see that would be the case, which is why I'm so surprised. Remember, there was just recently that horrific murder out, I think it was in Idaho, 4 college students, and there's no evidence. Nobody has a security cam. I guess if you want to avoid the security cameras, go to Idaho. And then with regard to the FBI using our cell phones, just a quick funny story. Well, it's not funny. Saturday night, about 10 o'clock, I dropped my cell phone and it just hit perfectly on a corner, cracked the screen, and then it refused to work. And I lost 1,701 contacts in my phone like that. So, and I had to go to Michigan for a funeral on Sunday, a wake and a funeral on Monday. So I had to stop halfway there so I wouldn't miss the wake to get a new cell phone when the store opened up at noon. So I just had to time it just right. Why? Because we're so attached to our phones. There's so much of our life is involved in that phone. My calendar alone, somebody asked me, what are you doing on such and such a date? I said, I've lost my calendar. It's almost impossible to leave it home, like you were saying. If you don't want to be tracked, leave your cell phone home. But if you don't bring your cell phone with you, you might as well just have that wired thing on the wall, like we all used to have, right? So now we have what's going on in Canada. Well, it's not just Canada. We have to know it's going on everywhere. The CBC just happened to report on it. And like you said, well, they're no friend of the conservatives. Why is that being allowed to happen? How is it there gets to be this Gestapo force kind of against people living in Canada? I don't care whether they're Canadian citizens or not. Why is a foreign police agency doing such and such that is now acknowledged to be doing so, like the CBC reported? It's not just happening there; it's happening everywhere. You have to know that. And but it's showing you how much influence the Chinese, in fact, do have. Remember, Trump kept warning us. Trump kept warning us about China, and people would make jokes about the way he'd say it, like China or like CHYNA or something. Trump was right. He knew, because Trump's a patriotic American, and who shouldn't be? Who wouldn't be? He was right in warning us about it. But when, as you pointed out with the FBI looking at your phones, we've got the FBI. You might as well just say they're coterminous with, they're synonymous with Gestapo, because that's what they've become. The Gestapo of the party in power, which happens to be the Democrats, which are going to, once they're in power, it's going to be hard to get rid of them. Whether it's the Chinese or whether it's our own FBI Gestapo or IRS Gestapo, who they're trying to get 87,000 more people with guns, the government is taking control. And we better be aware of it and try to defend ourselves against it, because our freedom is, we're delusional if we think that we're the land of the free. Remember we used to say, I think we called ourselves the land of the free here in America. Not so much anymore.
Since we're preparing for Christmas too, that there is still some fight left. Check this out. So what we found was that DeSantis and all of his support for people running locally for their local elections actually paid off. So there was 25 of the 30 school board candidates which were endorsed by DeSantis, 25 of the 30 won their elections, flipping the school boards in Miami-Dade, Martin and Clay and Sarasota and Duval counties from Democrat to Republican. And just in the last month, 6 out of 6 additional candidates won runoff elections. So as a result, and this is reporting from Politico, so not our side, more conservative school boards have already forced out left-wing superintendents in Brevard and Sarasota counties, and a third superintendent was just ousted in Broward County, which was not part of the electoral sweep, but has 5 new board members appointed by the governor. Fighting back does still work. Father, your take.
Well, you know what you have, though, in Florida is you have a governor who actually believes in God and in the freedom of the people, and is against but he had a tough go in the last election too. He did win, but there was great effort to unseat him, and you can imagine what would have happened if he was removed or lost. That's just one state, though, and there are 50 states out there. That's just 2 senators, and there's 98 other senators. I think I quoted before Frederick Douglass, a black, just a brilliant man in the 1800s, said, "It's easier to build strong children than fix broken men." So what they're doing by taking the communists, like Lenin is reported to have said, "Give me a job for 4 years and I've got them for life." That by taking over the school systems as they have, while the rest of us weren't paying attention, they have indoctrinated decades worth of kids now that have grown up to be voters in their left-wing communist ideology, calling it something other than communism, because we all knew communism was evil. Thanks be to God, DeSantis is reversing the trend down there in Florida, but that, you see, that points back to what we began our whole conversation with. Each state has the right within their state boundaries to control such things as public education. And what the national education, what they've done by having a Department of Education in the federal government is they've tried to control education of our people, of our kids. And so what they do, they tax us to death, right? The whole IRS thing was only supposed to be 1% at most of our national income tax, and now what is it? It's in 30% or higher. So what they do is they take our money and they say, now you will do what we tell you to do, and you will teach these topics with these books in your public schools, and we're not going to give you back any of the money that we've taken from you through our power to tax. A clear case of that is back when Nixon was president in 73, and they instituted a national speed limit of 55, which drove everybody crazy. They said, well, you as an individual state, because of that 10th Amendment, do not have to listen to our Department of Energy or Transportation and institute that 55-mile-an-hour speed limit. But if you do not, we're not going to give you back any of the money we've taken from you for road improvements. So they use money to hammer people into submission. So the same thing is going on with the Department of Education. And that's why, they have no right. They have no authority to do that. But they take our money, and the gold rules, doesn't it? So thanks be to God for DeSantis. Every conservative probably wants to move to Florida now because Texas is a good state. There are many good states. You look at the map and you can see which states are red versus all those highly populated blue states. You see where you don't want to. Glory be to God. Thank you, Ron DeSantis, for doing what you've done and leading the charge. And let's other states follow suit. Unfortunately, we still have to worry about the Californias Oregons, Washingtons, New Yorks, because they're lost, and the only divine intervention is going to fix this problem now.
When prominent leaders stand up and do the right thing, it's infectious. We have an example also from last week. The pro-life president of Malta, he said he's prepared to resign if the bill allowing abortion passes. Now, they are going through a bill. I think it's at second reading or something. But the president of Malta, his name is George Vella, he's a medical doctor. He opposes abortion in any circumstances. And he has said he is going to resign rather than vote for this legislation. You know, Father, isn't that true that I believe it was St. Luke went to speak, when he first went to evangelize, he went to evangelize the king in order to bring the rest of the people, because there is something about the leader of a country or a state doing the right thing and that spreading both courage but also example to other people.
You have to wonder, how is it that a place like Malta even gets to this point where they're considering the murder of babies? How do they even get that far? Because you would think that they were relatively Catholic. And why isn't it somebody like Bergoglio actually doing something about it? But you remember, he's been messing with the Order of the Knights of Malta and removing those solid Catholics, those solid Orthodox Catholics. So he's undermining the authority, the power or the influence of the church there and, of course, around the world. How is it that Ireland fell? And now is they're like one of the most liberal countries. And you say, how does this happen? How is it that people lose the faith? You know, the bishops kind of came out with something when the Senate passed the bill that we started with to legalize same-sex marriage. They came out with a weak statement, but you know what their statement was? What was it? We're greatly disappointed. What was the phrase? Some stupid phrase. How about bishops? You show a little guts and do what you're supposed to do, which is to say there's heaven and then there's hell. How about if they stand up and actually say something? Oh, I'm just deeply disappointed. Gravely concerned. You're not shepherding the people. You're not leading. A leader says this is the way and this is the wrong way. That's what a leader is supposed to do. That's what our bishops are supposed to do. And the reason we're in the mess we're in is exactly that reason. So yes, you're absolutely right. All it takes was a good leader, right? And that's why you constantly hear me say, you're probably sick of it, our bishops aren't doing their job. Because if they were, Catholics would be absolutely clear, including Nancy Pelosi. She would have been excommunicated and real Catholics wouldn't be listening to her. There wouldn't be confusion amongst the Catholics or other Christians who are also looking to them for guidance, for spiritual leadership in truth, the truth of the gospel. It doesn't, if leaders would just stand up and do their job, but we've got somebody in Malta doing it, but they can say, so what if the people of Malta can say, so what if we get a new leader? Does that impact upon our eternal salvation? No, where's the bishops? Why does it take the president to do this? So sorry, I'll never not stop critiquing the failure of the bishops to lead us as this president in Malta is leading his people. Where are they?
And one last thing before we close out, I just had to point to this. This was just beautiful. This was a coach. His name is Joe Mazzulla, and he's the interim coach. And he was asked a question about by a reporter if he had met the royal family. Of course, he's in England, so they were saying, hey, have you met Prince William and Kate Middleton? And his response is just gorgeous. Watch this.
Did you get a chance to meet with the royal family? And if not, how was it like having them there in the building?
Jesus, Mary, and Joseph?
The Prince and Princess of Wales.
Oh, no, I did not. I'm only familiar with one royal family. I don't know too much about that one. Thank you. But I'm glad hopefully they're Celtic fans. Yeah, thank you.
So, Father, your take on that?
Sure. He said it instantaneously, without hesitation, probably because he had already been told several times, oh, guess who's here, present in the Boston Garden watching the Celtics play. I forget who they were playing. And he just said it without hesitation because you could hear the female reporter getting all excited. Hey, what'd you think about Kate and William being here? And he just, very straight face, just simply said, Jesus, Mary, and Joseph. And there was dead silence in the room, right? It says, I guess that's it for questions for today. What a profound and beautiful thing for him to say amongst all this gaga falling head over heels over William and Kate, who are globalists themselves, by the way. Oh, very much globalist. So, yeah, thanks. In this Christmas season, in this Advent season, finally somebody stands up and says something so profound and beautiful. Jesus, Mary, and Joseph, glory be to God.
Amen. I think that was so beautiful on his part, and the timing could not be better. Boy, do we ever need a wake-up call that our true king is Jesus, and the Holy Family is indeed the royal family.
A leader, like you were just saying about Malta. There he was, a coach. And every kid that's watching that, every kid that's looking up to these players or to these, imagine what a witness of faith he was. Wow, we owe him a thanks.
Thank you so much, Father, and we'll be back to you all next time on Faith and Reason. Hi everyone, this is John Henry Weston. We hope you enjoyed this video, and to see more like this, be sure to hit the subscribe button below to get all the latest content from LifeSite News. So check out our links in the description to read more, sign up for our newsletter, and connect with us on social media so that you can stay up to date with all of the latest life, family, and culture news. Thanks for watching, and may God bless you.